there's a slim chance that he will laugh all the way to the bank and his NFT will truly be worth $2 million in a year. But I think it's much more likely that it's worth $0 in a year.
I feel like it's pretty likely that his relationship is worth $0 in a year.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Dougals, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
You're not in your house, Skippy. Or you're not in your shed, I guess I should say.
How do you know? Maybe I upgraded the shed.
That is true. That would be quite a switcheroo. I didn't realize you had that kind of craftsmanship.
I just got jealous of the Dougal's travel. I'm not in a Hilton, though. Any guesses?
I don't have the same obscure knowledge of hotellerie that you do.
So I actually don't want to reveal my location. I want to turn it into a quiz for the listeners. I'm in what I would call the momentum investing capital of the world.
Vegas?
Nailed it. Not a good place for a value investor. I'll tell a quick story. When I started my local value investing meetup, which I've done for a decade or something now, I first started at a restaurant, and I assumed, so we reserved a formal room. We had presentations going on. I assumed everyone would show up and buy a meal or at least a drink or something. And all the investors outside of me would show up and they'd buy maybe a coffee. So we'd take up 2 hours of this really nice conference space, and our total bill would be $17. So I eventually had to change my strategy because we were just completely wasting the restaurant's resources and time. I don't feel like Vegas is a great place for a value investor. Yeah.
It's not the purpose. I love that place though. So
I said it was the momentum investing capital of the world, and you're a momentum guy. This explains everything our listeners need to know, Dougals.
I love it. Okay. Can I throw out a funny little anecdote story that I came upon that Please. I think is wonderful? This should have nothing to do with non-fungible tokens or NFTs, but it does. This act, this human being performed. So I'm going to give you, I saw this on Reddit. I'm going to give you a little snippet. So background, this gentleman has been with his girlfriend for about 4 years. He's madly in love.
They're probably in Vegas right now, man.
Right now, yeah, they probably are.
Yeah.
So this guy decides that it's time to propose. Here's some context he provides. Jenna, his girlfriend, has recently been mad at me as I lost a significant portion of my half of our savings in Dogecoin. I did make half of it back with stock market options, but then lost some more, and she wanted me to quit. So I did. That sounds like, he's had some lessons. Girlfriend got mad. He's like, all right, I get it, right? Let me make sure I can settle down, get some fundamentals in shape now. No. A little bit further down in his post. Well, things were going okay. And then I found something that made my jaw drop. It was an NFT with significance to our life that she would love. I rushed to buy it with almost my entire life savings because I know this is a good one and that it could be worth $1 million when we're older. I got down on one knee and presented her with the NFT, and she started crying.
Tears of joy, Dougals.
I'm going to give you one guess. Were these tears of joy or tears of anger?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I've got to reset because I've got some feedback for the listeners recently that we dive in without defining things. An NFT is a non-fungible token. These have become very popular these days. We talked about it last week a little bit. Oh man, I feel, and then one other piece of context, Dougals, right? He's on Reddit asking, if I remember correctly, he's asking how he can smooth this over. I think it might be really tough to smooth over because he was in trouble after the Dogecoin incident. And this is a very similar pattern of behavior, right?
Dude, I wish he was on Reddit saying, "How can I smooth this over?" No, because
he wasn't.
Not exactly. This is where this whole. So okay, spoiler alert. These were not tears of joy. These were tears of anger. Okay, spoiler alert. he told her, it's a symbol of my love and devotion. But how did she see it? She saw it as selfish and foolish. So when you say he's trying to see how to smooth it over, this is actually the question that he left at the post.
Okay.
I don't want to sell the NFT because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I don't want to leave her. What can I do? So it's it's not this is not a smooth over. This is like ultimatum or like an internal ultimatum.
Let me ask you a somewhat hypothetical question.
Okay.
Do you think he loves the NFT more than he loves his fiance?
He doesn't know. But ironically, he's saying that he loved the NFT because of the significance to their life, but he might be willing to give her up to keep it. So I there's some lack of clarity in his thought process, this investment thought process.
So he didn't share or post the NFT, I don't believe. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm wondering if the NFT was available to me and I took a screenshot of it and put it on my phone,
Okay.
if that would also be significant to him, or if it's that line of code that says that he has ownership.
I think there might be a level of analytic and thought that we're putting into this NFT more so than this individual did. But just another, I thought this was funny, and just like another symbol of, come on, peeps, we gotta get our head in the game here. Poor Jenna
is what I say, because the Dogecoin thing, in a way, it's similar. Like, it's another digital asset that is hard to tie value to, and we've joked around with Dogecoin in the past, and we certainly understand why some people are intrigued by it. But I just think I'd say, almost from the consumer side, like, it's a brave new world, and it's tough to draw the lines right now of like what will be valuable and what truly has value. I mentioned in last week's episode that we called investing in the fashion metaverse. Like, I mentioned the hundreds of NFTs, and those things skyrocketed this week. Like, that's one of the hottest things happening right now. Everyone, it seems, that purchased those tripled their money in a week. And so that's the allure of that is very desirable. It feels like an asset class that is a no-brainer bet. And I understand how people get caught up in that. I'm happy I haven't got caught up in that at this point in time.
Have you read the 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss's book?
No, I've done the podcast and stuff. I'm vaguely familiar.
There's a part of it where I think this is it's an interesting concept, where he brings up how you don't need to make your money back in the same way that you lost it, but that's often what people do. So meaning you're sitting at the blackjack table, not that you would do this.
Yeah,
okay?
No, I'm a value investor. No chance. Seriously, no chance.
Yeah, no. So you're sitting at the blackjack table and you lose the $100. So then you're like, okay, well, now I have to play more hands so I can get the $100 back in blackjack, right? And he's like, you don't have to make your money back in the same way that you lost it. And this proposal of many of the things that we're bringing up just makes me think this gentleman is basically saying, I lost my money in Doge, so let me find some other risky investment to make my money back. Yeah. Oh, I got that back in options. Now I've lost my money in options. Let me find some other risky investment I'm going to make my money back in. Then I'm going to call love.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And I love that you're articulating it in that way. Like, I think what's really hard for the human psyche is, if you lost $1,000 in Doge in a week, to do it elsewhere, it might take half a year to make your $1,000 back. And I think that's what's so hard.
Yes.
But that is, in most cases, I'm sure, the right way to go. Really interesting stuff. And mostly I feel bad for this guy. There's a slim chance that he will laugh all the way to the bank and his NFT will truly be worth $2 million in a year. But I think it's much more likely that it's worth $0 in a year.
I feel like it's pretty likely that his relationship is worth $0 in a year.
Oh, I hope not,
I went there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenna. All right. So let's actually dive into some listener mail that pertains to the Alibaba conversation that we've had, and also pertains to one of your best friends, Chamath.
Maybe my best friend.
Maybe, yeah. For those that have not listened to all of our pods, which I think is none of you, but for those that haven't, Chamath, he's an investor in the Bay Area, historically done a lot of investing from a VC called Social Capital. That no longer exists. He's become recently the SPAC king, has a number of SPACs that all have like a IPO as their ticker. So it's like IPOA, IPOB, et cetera,
Yeah.
right? So he's been known as SPACing. He said a number of things that Skippy has not taken a liking to over the past few months. Particularly, there was one moment where he asked how much someone's children were worth as a representation of why value investing needs to get back to principles. We can put that aside for a second because in this podcast, so he is there's this All In podcast where Chamath and some of his good friends talk about a variety of different topics, and one of the ones they talked about this time was Alibaba, and it's actually interesting. So Chamath he's always looking for the way to like have the soundbite, right?
Yeah.
Say something a little bit controversial. But if you look past that controversy, I think that there were some interesting points that you brought in. So Jonathan sent this pod in, and I just want to drop a couple points. There was one line that I think I will take with me forever to bring laughter to my heart. And that's when he calls the VIE structure, which is a variable interest entity. It's an entity that you can say, instead of buying the actual asset, instead we're going to set up a holding company, and you can buy interest in the holding company, that the holding company now has rights to some control over the original entity and also a right to the profits. So this is how a lot of the Chinese companies have gone public in the US. Enron, which he mentions, has used this in the past to like hide assets and whatnot. Anyway, what Chamath says is if you read the VIE structure of Alibaba, that it is like a babushka doll of nesting entities. That image is just, it's so good. Like it's so good. Basically, around the VIE structure, what Chamath is saying is that it's such a complicated nesting of things that what are you even investing in is kind of the question that he ends up raising. And the point that he raises around it, which I think legally is true, politically becomes a bit less true, is that at any point in time, China can say, this thing no longer exists. That's what he's saying. Now, and again, I believe I'm not even an expert. I'm like not even familiar really with Chinese law outside of how, of like reading articles and stuff. But I believe that generally speaking, that's true. The VIE, I believe, is illegal in China. The Chinese government has made a list of a bunch of different industries where they say, if you exist in one of these industries as a company, you can't have foreign investors, so like non-Chinese investors.
Yes.
So that's where the VIE structure came from. And then there's also, from what I've read, some Chinese law that says that you cannot create a contract that goes around Chinese law, like in order to circumvent Chinese law, which technically a VIE would do. And so technically at any point in time, they could say this is illegal. What that would do has such huge ramifications. So let me pause.
No,
Comment.
so I love this. And I think you said it was Jonathan. Jonathan, thanks for sending this over. This is like truly one of the most interesting things I was able to listen to this week. Now, Chamath always gets me fired up, it seems, because his history with me is talking trash about value investing. And I know on that front, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but that's fine. In other spaces, he definitely knows what he's talking about. This one, I'm on the fence about. This was almost a fascinating thought experiment for me in some of the ways that you explained it. Like, yes, probably technically in Chinese law, because I am a Baba stockholder at this point, probably technically I don't have a clear tie to their assets. So that seems like it should cause concern. And in a way it does. But in a weird way, this didn't bother me at all, Douglas. Like I knew I haven't held any Chinese stocks until within the last 6 months, and I have two pretty extreme examples where I felt the regulatory risk or the government risk is outweighed by how cheap these stocks have become, right? But that was part of my equation. So if my investment for Baba only if I can only make money by some sort of lawsuit / liquidation of their assets, I'm going to be in trouble. That's not the path that I'm going for, right? What's so fun about this thought experiment is people like Charlie Munger, people like Tom Russo, like brilliant investors, people like
Monish Pabrai.
Yeah, sorry. They all own tons of Baba. What you're saying is like, well, what would happen? The Chinese government can say anything they want about almost anything. And if they want, they can kick. I don't know. I just don't think that's worth the risk. Even if that's technically how the law is written, I don't think you want to alienate all your worldwide investors.
Yeah, I think the political ramifications would just be so like almost too tremendous, it's a nuclear option, right?
Yeah,
Which,
right.
that's not to say it wouldn't happen. One thing, I might, if there are listeners that know more about the situation that I'm about to roll out, we'd love to hear from you, because I've only like briefly read this, and it's a bit ago. But one example that was non-government, it was actually Jack Ma, I guess himself, that demonstrated what the VIE structure allows organizations to do, is with Alibaba. And I hope I get this right, with Ant Group. Ant Group, which had the blocked IPO last year.
Yeah.
Ant Group used to be Alipay. So it was this very big part of Alibaba. They had a payment system, kind of like if you think eBay, PayPal, like just think analogous.
Yep.
They had this big payment system called Alipay. And Ma was like, I mean, obviously he couldn't do this single-handedly, but basically Jack Ma said, this is worth a heck of a lot. Alibaba can still thrive without it. Let's spin this out, basically take it off. But it was different than the way a spin-off might work. If you think about that working in the US, he just like took it, like he just took the assets and put them in a different company. And shareholders were like, whoa, hold, like you can't just do that. He's like, actually, I can. Like, you don't own that asset. And so I think that's where, and if I remember correctly, like Yahoo, which was a lot of Yahoo's money was coming from an investment in Alibaba, was like, oh, no, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's like an interesting and probably pretty rare example of something that a company could even do, given that the VIE structure means that you don't hold the assets. But
I think China's the only major economy in the world I can think about where this would even be discussed. If I buy ADR on a US stock exchange that is trustworthy, I've never in the past, like I've owned British Petroleum or who knows what else. I've owned a bunch of ADRs. I've never really thought about, should I be concerned that the New York Stock Exchange, in a way, and I'm using New York Stock Exchange as an example, didn't do their due diligence that says when I buy stock from them, I actually have a claim to assets of this company. Like, I've never even really thought that your typical investor had to ponder those things. And Chamath is claiming that you should when it relates to China. And I don't even second guess that. I just think it's a nuclear option, to your point, and I don't really think anyone's going to end up going there. And there's a reason that these Chinese holdings are really small position for me, because of that government risk. I mean, that's just always going to be there.
To your point, the thought experiment, I think, is fascinating. And there's so much that's going to be fascinating to watch as to how China prepares itself for whatever the future looks like. And it's taken, there's so much action. A few other things in China, there's like so much action they're taking, right? I mean, we've covered a bunch of it, but even this week there was more. So this week they came out with the kids can't play video games more than 3 hours a week.
My son was fired up about that, man. I can't ever get the China trip now. He won't go over there. He's like, you're not gonna let me play video games? I have no interest.
You just have to take a console. If you take a physical console, they don't know what you're doing there.
And like VPN it. I mean, tell me the loophole here, because I got to play my video games, Dougal.
Well, so from what I understand, a way that they're tracking this is mostly in online games, right? They're tracking it. And the online games have, like, the systems have facial recognition that they use as well, right? But if you take like your NES, your 1986 NES system, and just plug that in, right? I think you're good.
Oh, so if I'm not connected to the internet effectively. Yeah, so this is the funniest thing that happened to me this week. Is 3 weeks ago, there were these things, basically these masks that you could put on to avoid facial recognition, and they're becoming a hot thing in Asia, it claims anyway. But I was picturing someone wearing a fake mask, like a president's head or something, like playing Nixon, video games, so they could actually get through the loophole, right? So it's like, it's recognizing my face. It's not me, man. So I got it a whole nother hour.
Why has Richard Nixon played 17 hours of video games today? Yeah.
No, it's like Lincoln, then Nixon. It's like you have to switch a mask every hour, because I think you only get 1 hour per day. That's going to happen, man. It's totally going to happen.
That's great. That's great. The other thing, one last China thing, and then we can roll off. There's this concept of common prosperity that's now hitting the airwaves. So China's president came out and just said, like, we need to share the wealth amongst our full constituent base. And this makes me want to dive even further into understanding what China's after here, because it is so fascinating. For those that do not know, there is one ruling party in China. It's the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has been around for close to 100 years, right? Something like that, right? It's gone through all like the Mao Zedong, it's gone through all this stuff and has evolved over that time period. So you cannot call it pure communism, whatever pure communism is today.
Yeah.
However, at its roots, communism is something where you say like you're sharing assets. Like to put it like in the simplest way possible. I'm like oversimplifying that completely. But a couple factoids out there that I read about is one, so China has what effectively comes out to be a regressive tax system. So the lowest income workers pay 40% of their wages back. That's rough.
That's the lowest pays 40. Wow.
That's what I've read. That's what I've read.
Okay.
And then when you look at inequality, wealth inequality in China, it doesn't fare all that well. So neither does the US. I'll do a little quiz here. If you measure wealth inequality by the Gini coefficient, are you familiar with the Gini coefficient?
Vaguely. Yeah, I read about this in the past couple of weeks, but yeah, I think our listeners would benefit from a quick description there.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the math behind the Gini coefficient, but I can describe what it is. It was created back in like 1912 by an Italian, either sociologist or mathematician, something like that. But what it's the most commonly used measure of wealth inequality among countries. And it's a measure of 0 to 1 or 0% to 100%. And the thought is like what percent of the population like basically is in share of wealth. And so if you have a 1, that means that 100% of assets are basically owned by a single entity or a single individual. Mm-hmm. And a 0 would be like we all have $1, right? Like we're all equal.
Yeah, it's shared equally. Yeah,
exactly. All right. So if you use the Gini coefficient, what country has the highest wealth inequality in the world?
I'll say it this way to cheat. I'm pretty sure China and the US are 1-2.
That's incorrect, but it's a good guess. So it's South Africa.
Oh, really?
Which has, so 63.63, right, is South Africa's. Yeah. So Africa actually has most of the top 6, but when you get to China and the US, they're up there. But the US is a 0.35.
China's like 0.37 or
something like, I mean, so basically not doing well. And so what it seems like is happening right now is the Chinese government is saying, part of what you've gone back to, they've been like, we've allowed individuals to get out of control with the amount of wealth. We don't like that, right? You are not the leader of this country. We are the leader of this country. Wealth inequality is not doing so well. Let's use those entities and those individuals that have amassed this much wealth to basically create common prosperity. And they've cracked the whip so much in the last few months that the organizations and individuals are like, okay, like there's no, we want to have a company. So, okay, to the point where they're giving away these donations that are massive. So
$15 billion, right?
So Alibaba, $15 billion in donations. So that by itself is a heck of a lot of money. When you put it in context, how much cash before this 15 billion does Alibaba have?
Oh, I saw these numbers, but I don't know them off the top of my head. Fill me in.
45 billion. So giving away a third of their cash.
I mean, they're doing it through 2025. And
I'm trying to get headlines here, bro. No, that's true. And so by that point, I mean, they're going to be generating more and more cash as they go forward. So Tencent also 15 billion. They were going to give away 7 billion. And I think someone in the back end was like, I don't know if you saw what Alibaba was doing, but so then they
it's the other way around. I think Baba ended up matching Tencent.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
So they're giving away 15 billion. And also have something like $30-ish billion. And then Pinduoduo, which I think is how you pronounce this. That's how I think Americans pronounce it. It's an online grocery. They, for the first time, had a profit, like an annual profit, and they're giving it all away.
We gotta bring an expert on in this space. When we started the pod, I never thought we'd spend as much time talking about China as we had. I mean, they're like going after headline. I think they must I don't know, have a reality show going on or something, and the more things they can put in the Wall Street Journal, the better for ratings or something. So like, it's just fascinating, man. I mean, all those companies effectively got, it's like a higher tax rate that was kind of mandated slash suggested. And like, what does that mean? It's
Yeah.
too early to say, but it's just something
It
I
is.
never would have anticipated coming. And again, if you talk just Alibaba, like Alibaba went down, what, 60, 70% basically out of fears for what was going to happen. And now they've agreed to pay $15 billion over 5 years. Is the Chinese government truly going to be happy with that? Or in 3 weeks, are they going to have to raise that to $20 billion? Like, it's just, who knows what's going on
Yeah.
over there, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know. Bunch of stuff happening in China. Let's just sit down with our popcorn, bro. Watch this out.
Yeah. But so on the Gini coefficient and the 0.37 or whatever, again, I'm not an expert in communist governments, but isn't it weird that you're basically at the same level of wealth inequality as the US and claiming to be communist? Isn't that just odd?
At face value, yeah, that's real weird.
And so then these taxes, I'm just going to call them, is it even clear yet how that wealth is going to be redistributed?
I've only seen it at like the high level headline, in an article kind of level. So, but what it seems like is from what I've read, it's not going to the government. The money it's going directly, like they've pledged it to certain, I don't know if they're nonprofits, but organizations or initiatives, so I don't think it's flowing through the government. I think they've pledged where it's going to, but I don't know how specific they've gotten with that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty high level right now. But the interesting thing about what you're saying there, Douglas, is like, yeah, it's not going to the government, but it's $15 billion that is meant to appease the government. So basically, the government is saying you will send the money to this specific place. Like it's all behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
It's
And I
like
just would love to see how that actually works.
if Biden was like, I need to pay for these railroads, right, or whatever,
Yeah.
and I could either tax you, but I can't do that. I can't figure out how to tax you. So instead, Amazon, can you just give money to these straight infrastructure places? Like that feels like more of what's happening. So you're right, because of, at the will of, but not directly to, is how the money's flowing.
Can we touch briefly on Renaissance Technologies? I want to mention this for two reasons. Jim Simons, who has maybe the best investing track record that I'm aware of anyway, that led Renaissance Technology. Him and Robert Mercer just settled a probe with the IRS for $7 billion. So when we were talking about 15 billion in China, Douglas, you thought that was a big number. Can you imagine having to pay 7 billion in
Like,
back taxes
as an individual or set of
I mean,
individuals? Yeah.
It's a company, but it's a small company. I wanted to mention this for two reasons. One, the book on this is fabulous if you want to pick it up. But two,
I actually thought that it wasn't Renaissance that had to pay. I thought it was the individuals personally had to pay this amount of money. Is that wrong?
Is that because the trades were in their name, though?
It's like a short-term capital gain versus long-term capital gain situation where they, right?
Yeah.
But that's why I think it's like personally what they took out of like their profits from the fund.
Well, actually, so that's the main thing I wanted to mention. Their strategy was so good that they kicked out outside investors.
Yeah, we don't need,
made everyone that ever touched the fund like billionaires because they couldn't run that quant strategy with hundreds of billions, but they could run it with the people in the organization. So that's when you truly know that someone has a breakthrough, when they don't want your money. That was going to be my whole point. Like, anyone that's pitching you about XYZ is not as smart as Jim Simons, because he was like, no, I'm going to make everyone that matters in my organization filthy rich. And no one, I mean, the Medallion Fund, you couldn't even, after like the first 3 years, there was no outside money allowed because they wanted all the profits for themselves.
And the when you look at the returns by year, which I don't have in front of me, but I just remember it's like out of this world. I think this might be off
or something.
Per year. But even if you look at it on the year basis, the one that stood out to me was and they had this chart in the book that laid out the gains by year. And in 2008, I think it was something like up 80%. And it wasn't a one-off. It was, per your point, like it was bringing in 60%, maybe it fluctuated to 70% sometimes. And then
yeah, or maybe they had a rough time of 50, 40% returns.
Exactly. And the market goes down in half and it's 80%. And it's just, it was this thing, right? It was incredible. They basically, it's kind of like, we've discussed Ed Thorpe, I think, a little bit in his ability to use math to do amazing things across multiple markets, poker table, I think roulette, right? Stock market.
Yep.
And they just systematize that to the ultimate. Oh my goodness. It's
if
incredible.
I remember right, Ed Thorpe, another guy who might have the second best investing track record of all time, over the course of 20 plus years, I don't think he ever lost money on a quarterly basis. If he did, he might have had one quarter where he lost like a few bucks. He was down like less than 1%. I mean, the ability to make that money and make it consistently is unheard of. And again, Ed Thorpe was not a person, to my original point here, that was going out begging for money. He realized his strategy was so good that he was just going to sit back and cash the checks. Like the people that go out and beg for money typically are not the people that have strategies anywhere near as good as Ed Thorpe or Jim Simons.
And I'm just a little side tangent on Ed Thorpe that I think is interesting is, and we don't have to give a lot of background on him, but just really smart guy. Like that's what I'll throw out there. If people are familiar with the Black-Scholes formula, which is a formula for being able to value derivatives, that was used by long-term capital, which it did not end up working well for that organization. Mm-hmm. But Ed Thorpe basically like came up with this. This is not the real story, but I want to do this for entertainment value. He was like in the corner of a basement with a pencil and a piece of paper and came up with this formula like on his own. And so basically he had some conversations with, I think Fisher Black, Myron Scholes. Yep. I think he'd had some combos with them, like casually came up with this formula, started using it to trade, was doing incredibly well. And then a few years later, they remembered this dude that they talked to and they created this formula, came to him and they're like, can you check this out? And he kind of went, Ed Thorpe was like, well, crap. Like, cause he knows they're academics. And so they're going to put this out. And he'd just been using it in his hedge fund. And he was like, all right.
He'd just been making money for 10 years and there was no need. So yeah, we got on a tangent here, but I love both these books. So I've got to shout them out for the listeners. So the Ed Thorpe book is called A Man for All Markets. Truly like one of the best things you'll read. And the Renaissance Technology book is called The Man Who Solved the Market, how Jim Simons launched the quant revolution. Both great books and both fairly recent, actually. Both have come out within the past 3 or 4 years, I'd say. So check those out.
All right, I think you want to give a shout out to a piece of audio, little podcast that I mentioned earlier that was around Bitcoin, crypto, etc. You want to shout that out? Maybe we can talk about it for a minute.
I do, man. So if you're interested in the crypto space at all and more ready for like the 201 class instead of like the 101 class, the Lex Friedman podcast had Charles Hodgkinson, founder of Cardano, also co-founder of Ethereum, on. It's a 5-hour podcast. I would skip maybe the first hour or so. Really fascinating, thought-provoking stuff from truly someone in the space that's been around. And I feel like he gives great criticisms of Bitcoin and some of the limitations and the lack of evolution there, and then just general insights in the space. So if you're interested in that, I'd really recommend it. It's episode 192. It was very entertaining for me this week.
I only listened to 15 minutes of that. And this is a world that and you're into, much more than I am. But I found the 15 minutes I did listen to, it was the way that he like articulates and explains these concepts. It breaks it down. I'm not going to say in like the simplest way, but a way that someone that isn't as into it as I am, like can kind of abstract out, I think, to other, like can create analogies and abstract out into other concepts. And I thought it was really fascinating how he was talking about Bitcoin specifically and how Bitcoin it's like the V1 that refuses to evolve, right? Yep. And how it could, but now, as we've discussed before, it's basically a brand. Like it's riding on its brand and doesn't have a real identity that it's trying to push forth. It's just like this brand that seems to fit whatever the investor, quote unquote investor that wants to throw money into it kind of is. I think it's interesting. So just seconding your push, although I listened to a part of it.
Yeah, so Charles Hodgkinson is he's the founder of Cardano, which Cardano has gone crazy recently and is now the third most popular cryptocurrency in the world. More importantly than that, he's a teacher by trade and he's done a lot of
Okay.
academic research. And so there's a reason that he's good at explaining these things. He, on top of that, Douglas, he's incredibly well traveled. I think he's been 50 countries in the past 5 years. And he went to, I think it's Ethiopia. I just thought this was fascinating, and it takes it away from he doesn't care about people making money with crypto. He cares about he thinks the use case is intriguing. So Ethiopia wanted they were having some problems certifying different like basically educational. They were having a hard time with people kind of counterfeiting, being like, "Oh, I'm trained as a nurse, but you're not actually a nurse," or like, "I'm trained as a coder, but you're not actually a coder." So him and his team
Like
worked with the
verifying
Ethiopian.
credentials. That's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
They worked with the Ethiopian government to basically do like on blockchain, almost social security numbers and other things that you can tie a driver's license and a certification and different levels of education and theoretically even like medical records and all these other things that is publicly available and verifiable. But again, it's not, it's public, but you need kind of the key to see what identity ties to what, kind of you don't know the social security number without that magic key of the individual validating it for you.
Yep.
But then when they say, I have this level of education and I'm this old, and they give you that information, it's readily available. So there's just a lot of that sort of stuff that he's knowledgeable in that I find fascinating because again, I don't know, like that's more potentially game changing and meaningful long term for us than just finding some, making a penny here or there, right?
Agreed. And it's that determining those use cases for blockchain and or crypto is going to make all this stuff like actually take off in a sustainable way, right? I think you pointed that in the past. So thanks for sending that over.
Yeah, it's good stuff. What's in the fishbowl, Douglas?
I've got one last thing in the fishbowl, and this is about Robinhood, but actually not fully about Robinhood. It just impacts. It could potentially impact Robinhood a lot, and that's that our SEC chairman has said, and that's Gary Gensler. He said that payment for order flow, which we've discussed in the past, but to briefly hit on that, that's when instead of making money on the commissions per trade, you're getting paid by a third party that's doing the real trading itself and paying you for the right to trade.
The right to trade. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's a fair way to say
Yeah.
it.
And so they're basically what this incentivizes for a company like Robinhood that makes money on payment for order flow is the quantity of order flow itself, because you make less per trade. So you need more volume. And so making
Yeah,
it as
so
easy.
the
Yeah,
number
go
of
ahead.
trades is important for their business model.
Exactly. And so, so Gensler, what he's saying is, as he's trying to figure out like how he's going to do whatever he decides to do with regulation to get the markets kind of in order, one of the things he's saying is on the table is banning payment for order flow. Robinhood makes 80% of its net revenue from payment for order flow. So that's obviously not good. I don't know if I'm not sure how I feel actually when it comes to this. To be honest, I mean, I've seen like the arguments that sit out there where the like brokerage houses like Robinhood are saying that this increases like access, right? Because you don't have to have a commission, so it democratizes markets. And the critics are saying basically what we talked about is that there's this conflict of interest that kind of sits out there. I get that. I don't feel like I have a strong view, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, what we kind of talked about the costs associated with trading equities, what, like 3 weeks ago? There was a pretty decent article that broke it down. Uh, I would say exactly what we said 3 weeks ago. Like, it's important to know that Robinhood has different motivations here that might be tied to encouraging you to trade more frequently, and all of your brokerage effectively do, Fidelity, Vanguard, whoever else. But in the grand scheme of things for your average investor, it probably costs pennies or less than pennies. So it's not something I'm particularly fired up about. And I don't see this as like a burning bush or burning bridge or something that needs to immediately change. I think it's just something to be aware of and keep an eye on.
And maybe to even be more specific from what I was saying, I don't feel very strongly when it comes to like the overall like market of which is better or worse. I would rather not have to pay commissions. Like personally, like I'm like not that it's going to make a huge difference, but I'd rather not pay commissions. But the place this brings up for me a tweet that you shot over this week too, because the broader thing that it does get me thinking about is all of the hidden costs that end up hitting individuals that they don't realize, right? So I mean this, and we've talked about all this as well. I mean this in a few different ways. Like some of the hidden costs that I think are, I'll say more obvious, but that people still don't necessarily think about a lot are taxes and any transaction costs, right? That might hit. Mm-hmm. Those are some quote unquote hidden costs. I mean, they are out there in the open, but I think people don't think about them enough, so they're hidden. But the other, which gets back to that tweet, is the timing of the market. Maybe that's the easiest way to think about it. And people thinking of like getting in and out of trades and the amount of money that you end up losing based on the timing of the market is like another one. That if you're someone that's now saying I'm an amateur, but I'm going to be like a high frequency trader of any sort, that you end up on paper, you might say, I'm going to look at what my stocks did over the course of periods of time, but you don't realize that you lost like 1% here, 3% there, 2% here, based on your timing. This study, it's an annual study. This is the first time I've seen it though, is called Mind the Gap. And what it showed was if you look at the 10-year investment returns that ended at the end of last year, so 10 years ending 12/31/2020, that investors earned 1.7% less per year than what their fund investments were over that time period. Meaning that at the beginning of that 10-year period, if they'd just thrown money into, let's just call it one ETF to keep it simple at the beginning, and held through the end, they would have made 1.7% per year, which is a lot compounding over that period of time. Then instead of what they actually did, they're saying that they were buying in and out of these funds. And so they were, by the quote unquote timing the market, they were missing out on just the buy and hold returns they could have gotten.
Yeah. So Douglas, we've talked about the Dalbar study on investor behavior before, and some concerns that come with that. I find this Morningstar research more credible. It shows, I mean, there's a similar conclusion here. It doesn't say the performance of your average investor is quite as poor as the Dalbar study seems to say, but there definitely is a performance gap. And what's interesting is they break it down by, they call it US category group. And so the gap varies based on the type of investments. Like they have an alternative category where the gap's almost 4% alternative investments. So investors there seem to be more apt to buy high and sell low, I'd say, than someone with a more traditional like US equity allocation, which makes sense to me. I think if you're in alternative investments, you're more likely to be a frequent trader or someone that's trying to ride waves of momentum than someone that's just buying a basket of US equities and hopefully sitting with it for the long term.
Let that be a lesson to you. All right,
it's a good study. I'll throw it on the Twitter.
You got anything else in your fishbowl?
No, man. Wish me luck in the momentum investing capital of the world.
You don't need luck in Vegas. You don't need luck. Get out there. Do your thing. Don't be scared. YOLO.
I'm terrified.
HODL.
I'm terrified.
Whatever. All of it.
Hit us up on Twitter at SkippyDougals and on Gmail, skippydougals@gmail.com.
Thank you. Peace. Rate and review, please.